Howdy, Nimsy Facilitators. It's Stephen Yale, Manager of Science Program Design. I'm going to walk you through your course folders and your first two sessions of your online cohorts. So I'm going to go to the biology folder. All of these look the same. When you get into your folder, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see a folder of facilitator guides, a folder of participant guides, a folder for an example, and then some contact info. And the contact info sheet you're going to want to do during your first session. Keep in mind that you probably have been sent all of your people's information, but they don't have each other's. So you're going to want to have them fill this out during the first cohort. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the example folder real quick because I have an example created for you showing kind of how to do the first two sessions. So I'm going to assume in this tutorial that you're relatively familiar with the cycle overview, but you maybe haven't seen it in action yet. So I'm going to open up the session 1 example for science. And here we go. So this is what your facilitator guides look like. Keep in mind there's also a participant guide that your participants will have in front of them. So these first couple pages are relatively important. They outline your instructions and like kind of overall details. One of the things with online delivery is that you have the opportunity to be fluid, and we want it to be a cohort. So like we want you to go the direction people want to go with their conversations. However, you need to be cognizant of what the objectives are because sometimes you got to steer people back. So be aware of what these objectives are. And the objectives for a cohort session are really pretty straightforward. For this one, you want people to get to know each other and you. Collaboration will only work if people are comfortable with each other. You want to teach them the basics of the cycle that they're going to follow, the data to action planning cycle, and then identify an assessment worthy of analysis, identify skills needed to perform that assessment, and then identify how they're going to deliver it, what some misconceptions might be the students have, and what available resources there are. So now when you think about those things, if you have people that want lab ideas, if you have people that need content support, if you have people that are struggling with classroom management, this cycle, the reason we've chosen it is because it offers room for all of those conversations. Now, to prepare for session 1, you need at least 2 facilitators. You should have that. One of you is going to be the opening facilitator. Notice we've color-coded this in blue. Another is going to be the closing facilitator, which is color-coded in green. Any additional facilitators will play support roles for this, but you guys are going to want to cycle through these roles as you go just to make sure the work is equally distributed. In this box right here of materials, this outlines who needs to do what to prepare for the session. So the opening facilitator is going to do all the sections outlining that have blue headers. The closing facilitators are all the ones that have green headers. And notice that there are materials in your participant guide that they are going to want to do as well in advance. So please read through all this. I'm not going to read it at you because y'all are grown-ups and you can do that yourselves. Now, I will call your attention to the talking points and key messages. When you're dealing with online and you want people to talk, you're not just talking at people. Sometimes things will go directions that you didn't expect. Sometimes you'll even take things in a direction you didn't necessarily expect. So be aware of your key messages that you want to portray, especially during this first session. The biggest thing is that this data to action planning cycle is a vehicle. We are not just going to force teachers to give 8 assessments for the same reasons they normally give assessments, which is to get data for an administrator or something like that. This is solely to inform their practice, and it acts as a vehicle to have lots of other conversations. Keep bringing them back to that. If they express needs, make sure that those needs are brought back up and talked about at different points of the cycle. And then also formative assessments are very underutilized. So a lot of teachers, especially AP, are good at giving exams that are similar to the AP test, but we're doing this in a formative way. And the key thing we're going to focus on with that is when you get down to the part where you talk about delivery options for your assessments, you do not want to always do them in just a traditional classic quiz way. You want to make it engaging and show that assessments can actually be good learning experiences and can be kind of fun. I talk about some other stuff in here about facilitating online. If you're not familiar with that, please read that. Differentiating for experience levels, please read that. It's very important. And then also reflections. So now, as we go down, sorry, I get a little laggy when I'm recording. We now are into the sections that you will fill out in advance, and this is really your script for the session. So all of the things in blue are done by the opening facilitator. You can say we have time for an introduction, identifying needs, and establishing goals. Those are your first about your first like 45 minutes to an hour of your session. And what you're going to do in here is you are basically going to make everybody comfortable, and you need to get to know your people and what they're looking for from this cohort. A cohort of people has advantages over a face-to-face session in that it takes place spread out over time. So if people have needs, those needs can better be met than just in a couple hours of face-to-face training. The only way you can do that is if you know their needs and you tie them back to what we're doing. It's very important. Now, I don't have scripts for you because we trust you guys to do that. But I will point out that when you're facilitating online, it is very easy to lose track of what you're saying, forget where you're going, or just entirely skip parts. So you definitely want to outline a script and talking points for yourself. Do that in advance. It'll be in the document. It'll help you later as you do the next one, and you can kind of adapt as you go. So please fill these out in advance. When you get down to part 3, this is very important. This is where you're going to do an overview of the data to action cycle and discuss methods. So if you have trouble with the data to action cycle, reach out to us. We can help you with it. It's fairly straightforward, but it is a little confusing at first. So we think you guys are going to get it, but we fully expect to have questions. Don't hesitate to ask those questions. Now the methods part, this is where there's no way for us to anticipate how much of a struggle this will be. And this is when we're talking specifically about online facilitation. If people have a hard time with using technology like Google Docs and stuff like that, you're going to want to address that at the beginning. So if you invest some time here, it'll pay off later. What you want to avoid is people learning on the fly when it comes to that kind of stuff, because it's going to derail your session. So think through how you're going to do that. We have some bullets down here, some talking points, some things that you want to think about and discuss, and then there's a place for you to put your script. So if you struggle with this or need help, reach out. Maybe the first person or the facilitator that's the most comfortable with technology should be the opening facilitator of this session. So that's one way to think about it. Now, at this point, you're going to hand off the presentation to the closing facilitator, who will have filled out all of these parts on this document that have green headers. And this is where we're really starting the data to action cycle. So you can see that these are already filled in because I've done this already as an example. So this first part, you're introducing the next assessment. So if I was the closing facilitator for this, this is what I did. I went in and these are physics examples, and I selected 3 physics questions that would make good formative assessments for us to give in our classes over the next couple weeks. I've outlined the topics in the summary for each, and I've outlined my own notes. This does go in the participant guide, so they're gonna have access to this, but I'm not just gonna read this to people. This is so that I really have in my memory a very detailed overview of what each of these 3 questions is. And then here is the most important part. How are you going to decide which of these assessments to give? You're going to talk to your participants. If they're all on pace with our pacing guide, that is what this one is for. So I've looked at the pacing guide, and based on where we are, it's like the middle of October. We should be on energy in the next few weeks if we're teaching Physics 1. So this would be a good assessment. To right on track with the pacing guide, that should be perfect. However, we all know there's a very strong likelihood everybody's not going to be on track. So I've selected another one, and this other one is if they're behind or they indicate that their students are struggling. So you may have some people that are behind and some people that aren't. Well, if those people, their students still struggled in the previous unit, there's nothing wrong with taking 15 minutes to give a formative assessment over previous material. So this one is selected to meet those needs. Now, so this one's if they're on pace. This one's if they're maybe not on pace. The third one is kind of my catch-all for like the worst case scenario. What if I have somebody who is sick for like the first 3 weeks of the year? I don't know. There's like neither of these 2 will work. This third one was selected because it should be a no matter what, it would be okay to do. We don't want to always do those because then you're always doing things that are kind of generic. But you want to have one of those that you can pull out in a worst case scenario. So I'm going to give an overview of these. We're going to talk about them. We're not going to solve each one yet, but really what we're doing here is we're just selecting which one of these we can all agree to give to our students in the next few weeks before the next session. Then, once we pick one, I am going to walk through, because I don't even know if all of my participants know how to solve that problem themselves, and that's for a lot of new AP teachers, that's a very real possibility. So I'm actually going to solve this problem in front of them and with them. So the only way that I can do that in a timely manner and efficiently as if I've done it recently. So you're going to want to solve these problems in advance and think about online facilitation. You're going to want to have a way to show these in advance. So I would probably do it through images and put them on a Google Doc. If you have some sort of screen casting software to where you can work it live on a web page or something like that and direct them to a link, you can do that. I would probably not try to draw with your mouse in the Blackboard Collaborate room. It's pretty difficult to do, but it's really, you want to figure out what's going to work. Now, I do have a script here that I've written for what I would do for this, and you can see that, I'm not just going to make them watch me solve the problem. I'm going to have them solve it also. The experienced people will probably breeze through this pretty quickly, but that's okay. You want to keep things moving. And then I also have some notes over here to the side. So these are things that I'm going to make sure that I point out about the question itself. So, if you have new teachers, make sure that you specifically call out logic or methods that you follow. Or if there's certain things that like experienced teachers do in your subject area, you want to model those for your new teachers because they don't know those. But these are my talking points. If I was solving this problem with a bunch of teachers, these are the things that I would have in my head while I'm doing it. Now, notice that there's two other questions because I didn't know which of these three we were going to pick. So I should be prepared to talk about any of those three, but I'm only going to do one. You're not doing all three. You're only doing one of them. But you don't know which one in advance, so you got to be ready for all three. Now, once we're done with that, we're really at the end of the session. So we've chosen an assessment. We've solved the assessment so the teachers are comfortable and they know kind of what the content is. The next thing is to decide how to give that assessment. And this is where you can talk about all kinds of stuff. Like I have examples here. It could be a timed quiz. It could be a group quiz. It could be a method that I used to use, which is called 1 quiz, 2 brains. There's all kinds of ways of doing quizzes. You're welcome to choose one of these. You can generate your own, but talk about which one of these do you guys want to do. I encourage variation, so sometimes AP students should sit for a regular old free response that's timed, and if they get 12 minutes to solve that problem in the test, that's exactly how much time they get in my class. But I don't always do that because that gets kind of, boring, and sometimes I may not be ready for that because it's more still in the learning phases, so I may want to put them in groups and let them do that. Free response questions don't always have to be formal quizzes, but you guys decide on it. And then after you decide on it, make sure you answer anybody's questions. One of the last things that you also want to talk about, and I actually have this up here so I kind of forgot, is what other resources does NIMSY provide or can you provide in terms of labs, notes, etc., etc. We have lots of stuff in Blackboard. Make sure they know what they are for that topic. So once you've done that, the session is at an end. You have a checklist here that you want to make sure that you hit before the next session. If people don't do these things, it's going to derail the whole next session. So you want to clarify that all participants know what assessment to give. If somebody gives the wrong one, it's going to mess things up. You want to clarify that all participants know that they need to collect 5 student samples, and they don't need to be good, but they shouldn't be blank. They have to have stuff with some meat that you guys can look at and dissect. And then clarify that all participants know how to submit their 5 student samples in advance. You don't want people emailing them back and forth during a session. If we have a template in your folder. The gap analysis session example, you have one of these for each session, and in there's blank pages where they can upload all of their stuff in advance, or they can email them to you and you upload them in advance. It's really up to you. And then clarify that all participants know what assessment delivery option. So are we doing a formal one? Are we doing in groups? What are we doing? And then lastly, make sure they do the exit ticket. And please make sure they do that before they log off. Don't say go do this because half of you won't do it, and then we won't have our data. We need that stuff. So that's your checklist before the session ends, and then you're done. That's your 2 hours. You probably, hopefully you didn't run out of time. Hopefully you don't have 45 minutes left. But you feel free to stick around and answer people's questions, etc., etc. It is supposed to be collaborative. Now, keep in mind, as a closing facilitator, you will be the opening facilitator next time. And the reason for that is that you have been in charge of this selection of this question. Well, the next time when they come back, they're going to analyze it. So you're logically in charge of that. So you have some prep work for that, as well as the closing facilitator for next time is going to have some prep work. They're basically going to do what you just did. So now, if we go to the second part of the example, so now a couple weeks have gone by, and we're ready for the next session. This is what your templates actually look like for the rest of the cohorts, like all of them, 2 through Notice the beginning is different because we don't really need to get to know each other as much and talk about all that stuff that we talked about last time because it's not the first session anymore. We're in the same people and we know each other. So you're going to want to do some sort of warm-up. And I would always think about this as something that's just either something they can do in class or something that's quick and kind of fun and interesting. So, you know, I've picked one here. This is a script that I wrote. You're welcome to steal that and use it, but you come up with other ones. You should probably do a different one every time. You don't really have to. Some of them are good every time. After that, you do a warm-up. You're going to do some model scoring. So this is the next step in our cycle. So they've brought their 5 samples, right? Well, before they do that, you want to teach them how to score that question. So you're going to want to bring some of your own student samples for that question. If you don't have them, that's okay. You can make them up, or you can use the ones on the College Board website. But you're going to want to score those samples live for them. And the key thing here, if you think about time, is that you're not spending 5-10 minutes on a single response. You want to do this. It's almost like baby reader training. You're getting them ready for the College Board reading at a small scale. So you really want to teach them. You're not reading into stuff too much. It's either there or it's not. Use the rubric, use the scoring guide, and they either get their points or they don't. So here's where you're going to put links to your stuff so it's all there in advance so people can click on it. You don't have to send things to people and shuffle around. It'll be key with online facilitation is to be done in advance. Okay, and you're going to do 2 of them. That's it. It should be 2 different examples. Not perfect, not all zeros. Then what you're going to do is you're going to split people into buddy pairs. So buddy grading is a really good way of doing things. It keeps people on task. It also keeps people honest. So the goal is to have some accurate scores. So you're going to split them up into their breakout rooms. I have a sample script for how I would do this down here. And they only have a few minutes, but they're going to score their 5 samples each. If they use our gap analysis session example, there's a way of having 2 on a page, 2 on a screen at a time, so they can kind of see each other's and compare and contrast. So that's kind of what I recommend where to go. Okay. Then after that, you're going to create the gap analysis. Now, before you can do this, especially the first couple sessions where you do this, you're going to want to show them an example. So I have an example linked here. If I were you, I would create an example for your course. If I'm going to lead this session and I'm going to teach people how to make this thing, I'm going to need to know how to do it. So I would probably make one of these in advance. They're not challenging. If you've never done this before, you'll probably start liking it. Basically what I've done is I took a chemistry question and I've done some screenshots just to put it up here, and this is actually the scoring guide. So I've taken each point from the scoring guide or each block from the scoring guide, depends how the scoring guides are made, and this is what you're going to show your participants. This part down here is going to be blank. For your example, of course, it'd be filled in, which is what this is. So what a gap analysis is basically I'm looking at these point by point. So this kid gets 1 point for for doing a calculation of the pressure of the dry ethene. Well, what I need to know as an expert teacher is not just whether they get the point or not, but what are some reasons why they might not have gotten that point. A kid might not know how to do stoichiometry. They might not know how to do unit cancellations. They might not know how to do algebra, or they may not know what ethene is. There's all kinds of different things. I can't just as a teacher say they don't get the point and that's all I need to know. I need to figure out where they are. Am I having kids with a bunch of background skill problems like algebra? Do I need to spend time on unit conversions? And it's all based on the evidence of what's on the paper. So if I see kids that are setting up equations and everything is right, then all of a sudden I'm getting weird answers, that tells me something. If I don't see the equations set up properly, that tells me something. So what you do is you bullet these out, and those are specific things that tell me where they are in their gaps. What are my student gaps that I have? So you're gonna show them an example of one of these. Now, once you do that, that's your example. You're going to split them up and challenge them to do the same thing with the question that they selected. So, sorry, if you heard a noise in the background, it's my kid coming home from school trying to scare me or something outside. So you're going to split them up and they're going to do their own. So you have in their folders, with their participant guides, there is a gap analysis template for each session. And again, it's a little laggy. So you have all of these gap analysis templates down here. So that's where they can do all of that work. And you're going to assign them and split them up so they do, maybe 2 points per person or something like that. If you have a big cohort, you can literally assign to where I might only have to do 1 point. If we have a small cohort, I might have to do more points than that. Then after they do that, you're going to bring them back together. And now you, in advance, should have kind of thought about this. And what are some key gaps from that problem that you want to make sure make it on that gap analysis? The teachers are going to do it, and they'll probably do a good job. But there may be some things that you don't want them to miss. Make sure you identify those in advance. Now, once they have that, they have a gap analysis, they look back at their student responses, and they analyze their gaps. So where are their students having gaps? So here's an examples that I've come up with. Remember, anything with a box you fill out in advance. So from looking at a question from Physics 1, one of the ones that I picked from last time, there was a graphing problem. So if I see funky lines, that indicates there's missing understanding of how equations determine graph shape. So that is a gap. So based on that gap, here's a recommendation for things that I could do in class as a teacher. Another gap is if they have incorrect minimums and maximums on their graph, that tells me that they're not using conservation of energy logic. They don't understand that concept. Otherwise, knowing what the min and max is actually pretty easy. So if they have that gap, here is a recommendation for a thing that I could do in class to help with that. They don't all have to be specific. They shouldn't derail class and be a new lab or something like that. In many cases, it's just changing warm-ups. It's adding things to the daily cycle of your classroom. Now, notice that at this point, we have now analyzed the question that you chose last time, and teachers should have their own kind of next steps. This is a big part of the facilitators right here, is when they have gaps that they identify, you guys are going to have to help them have creative ways of offering interventions that are easy to implement. You don't want this to become something that doesn't really work. Small things make a big difference. So that's a big part of your role. At this point, you're going to hand off to the closing facilitator, and if you scroll down to the next part of the guide, you'll notice that this is now a repeat of what you did last time. So now they're basically taking over for you, and they're starting the cycle over again, and that's going to continue. They'll be the opening facilitator next time and do what you just did. So that's an overview of the cycle. The key things are it's flexible, and it should offer help to a wide range of teachers. All right. That was a longer video than I planned, but it is what it is.